and I thought many times that I would like to work the land. My aspiration was a dream which could not be realized, but now I was being given the opportunity to realize it. The things I read in books described Canada as a Garden of Eden. I envisioned the land in summertime, many shades of green swaths as far as you could see, flowers filling the air with pleasant odors. I said to nature, let me have wings so that I can leave this crowded city with its polluted air and go to my blessed land.
Abraham Feuer, like most other Eastern European Jews, had a difficult life. Poor and limited to working as peddlers and traders, they had no hope of owning land. But at the end of the 19th century, Canada was looking for immigrants to settle the West, offering land in exchange for clearing and farming. At the same time, the financier and philanthropist Baron Maurice de Hirsch and his wife Clara wanted to help Jews become self-sufficient farmers. To that end, they founded the Jewish Colonization Association. So, often with the aid of this association, Jews moved to what is now Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba to homestead.
The Baron de Hirsch was a unique person in that he absorbed something that was in the air of that time that said agricultural work is a noble calling and does much to redeem the soul of mankind from the alienation and degradation of poverty and of city life. The common wisdom is that the Jews left Russia and settled in America in order to alleviate poverty and avoid the pogroms and discrimination. And all that is, of course, true. But along with them, they brought this spirit of the times that said, maybe if we were farmers, if we got close to the land and to the nature, we would be better people. And he wanted the Jewish farmers to raise grain, and he wanted to turn them into peasants on the European style of these people who worked hard and did not complain and did not rebel and did not take in ideas of Marxism or of socialism of any kind, but simply worked obediently and made a living, and that this would cure anti-Semitism. I don't think he was totally right about that, but there was a grain of truth in it that moved many people.
Canada had finally opened the door to Jews in the West because they were afraid of the Americans taking over the prairie provinces. And they were given the bait that they could own 160 acres of land for $10. Oh, they had to break a certain number of acres each year. They had to build a house, which was really a shack. Life was so indescribably difficult. There used to be a saying, not just amongst the Jews, that if you survived 3 years and didn't die, then you got the land.
Well, my great-grandfather, Abraham Clenman, they came from Bessarabia in 1887. They didn't speak a word of English, of course. They had hardly any money. So the Canadian government was offering a quarter section of land for settlers, and Abraham decided to take this offer. So he went there, started to dig a hole for a foundation for his family, who were still back in Montreal, but he didn't realize how quickly the Saskatchewan winter settled in. And rather than go back to Montreal and give up this property, this land, he decided to stay. And he stayed underground. He covered the area, the so-called foundation was branches, and he lived there all winter. He was helped by the local Indians that would bring him food. Some local English farmers helped him. And the next spring, he sent for his family. He started to build a log cabin.
So they built these little houses to cover the graves, and that's an old country style of making little brick houses with tin roofs on them. I don't remember if it's 1901 or 1902. That's the first grave.
My dad came to Canada in 1913. When he came to Lipton, he got married in Lipton, and I was born in Lipton. In 1918, we moved out to the Jewish colony at Herzl, and I have been living there since. Jewish language I learned because we went to school, and the school had a Jewish teacher in there. After the English school was through, the Jewish teacher took over, and we had to wait for Dad to pick us up. And all the teaching was done on blackboards. So we waited for Dad, and many a time we waited an hour before he come. So that's where we learned Hebrew, from the blackboards.
But are you Jewish?
I'm not Jewish, no, I'm Polish.
The first group of settlers that came out from Romania was single people. They came out in 1901. And the next group came out in 1902. My dad was one of them. And then they tried to farm, or did their best to make a go of it. Well, I heard of more than one of them that on the hot days, if the flies and mosquitoes got the best of them, the ox would just take off to the nearest slough they could get in, and then you couldn't get them out of there till they were good and ready to do it, and they could stay for a few hours.
Everybody knows that in the early days, the times were hard. There was very little money around. Winters were harsh. Roads were bad. Town was 15 miles from our place, so if anybody needed any help, so they had to work together. And they came and they lived in tents or whatever it was, and they were building their homes for their spouses when they would come a year later or 2 years later, whatever it was, you know. A lot of people ask about bordays, you know. Bordays is a house that's built in the ground in the hill, and a house put over top of that, you know. It's like a cave. In the summer, it was an advantage, because in summer when it was hot, you went down in the basement, you know. That was like a basement we have now. And in the winter, it was always warm in there too, because there was no frost. When you needed to go on top, well, you went on top in summer. Mostly was lived in summer. In the winter, they lived mostly in the bordays in the basement. So we had a meeting. I remember one time Mr. Belkin was out, and he says to the trustees, and he says, how come that your district pays the highest tax for teachers' salaries? One of the Jewish trustees got up, he says, Mr. Belkin, I'm going to ask you a question. What is better, to have money in the pocket or brains in the head? We are looking for education, he says. That's why we pay so much.
Today we stand here by the synagogue, which is idle. And the reason that the synagogue is now empty, because the colony has vanished. There is no more Jewish people living here. My father also came from South Africa. I think he was one of the originals that ran away from Latvia. And the reason was that Jews were persecuted. Nobody regarded their life at all. Their mother was killed by Cossacks and pogromchiks, and they were left widows. They weren't allowed to own any land. They lived in the slums, and they foresaw no future. And one day, Our Uncle Louis Vicar picked up a paper, a Canadian paper, and lo and behold, 160 acres of land for $10. And that was all that they needed. They could have settled around Regina, the eastern plains, where they wouldn't have to scrub and grub every inch like they did here, but they wanted bush and water, because a forest in the old country and water was worth a fortune. The congregation flourished. They had their hard times, at one time reaching a peak of 90 families. For the Jewish people, it was hardest because they were all Orthodox that came from the old country. Where were they going to get kosher meat or kosher poultry? So they lived on zoyers. You know what zoyers is? Borscht. In the summertime when the young beets, and in the wintertime they lived on vegetables. And put near every family, not every family, they brought along a father and a mother. Their children would bring them here with bed and clothing and food. They'd stay right here.
In the synagogue?
In the synagogue.
They slept and
they slept in the synagogue because you never knew Rosh Hashanah, it could be raining and muddy, so people would walk. The old people couldn't. So they slept in that little place out there. There was always enough wood for them, or they slept in benches. But for Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, they were so very ultra-Orthodox, very religious, they never went to bed. The Medicare system established then was even before the CCF was elected at that time, or maybe in their diaper stages. I remember doctors were working for nothing, hospitals were working for nothing because people didn't have the money. And I remember in the winter nights, 12, 1 o'clock, we slept upstairs, the phone would ring. This is Dr. So-and-so calling from Melford or from Tisdale or from Nipawin. So-and-so needs a surgery, appendix or something, will you guarantee the operation? Well, what could my dad do? He was human, sure, you're not going to let a person die. Get back into bed, half an hour later the hospital would phone. And finally it dawned upon him. And he had 6 counselors and he was a reeve. He says, we're going to put on a 1 mil levy and we're going to have a prepaid Medicare system. The council went along with him. The people were grateful. They went ahead and made contracts with the doctors. And when Willow Creek's established that Medicare, it echoed through all the province of Saskatchewan.
They were draft dodgers, original draft dodgers. They were not about to fight in the Tsar's army in Russia. They got to London. And of course, there were sweatshops, there were mothers nursing babies lying in gutters, there was inhumanity to man, and they just thought if they could only get a piece of land of their own and they could work together communally, cooperatively, and just be kind one to another. So Uncle Mike came the following year after my dad. And seriously, there were no roads, there was lots of tree clearing that needed to happen, there was no running water, there was no means of communication. There were such great distances, and mostly you had to walk because even the ruts weren't good enough for sleighs or wagons, you know, in certain weather. There were 2 factions. There were those that came to better their life from a financial point of view if they could. For the guys like my dad and my uncle and their buddies, they were idealistic young guys who wanted to banter philosophy around and sociology, and they didn't care if they got rich. As long as they had a tin roof and the rain didn't fall in, they could manage. Uncle Mike, he was the one who instigated the building of the hall, as they call it, because before that there was a synagogue. But a synagogue, from his point of view, it wasn't a place where people who worked hard and then wanted to dance and sing and perform and celebrate their own hard labor in a more partying fashion. And you could do it with your non-Jewish co-farmers. They used to call him the walking library. He got books sent from New York, from Toronto, from Montreal, wherever the big centers were. And even speakers would come out. He was Uncle Mike to everybody, and Uncle Mike was the focus of their life. The theater groups, the choirs, the school, he taught them, the libraries, and all of them said they would never have learned Yiddish otherwise. His idealism was to build a cooperative commune. So one person in every farm didn't have to repeat the same basic jobs. A team would go out of all of them and plow. The next time they'd all go and seed. The next time they could go and reap. And they could use one set of equipment instead of everybody, which nobody could afford. Did they succeed or fail in their idealistic goals? And my answer, for them, they did what they wanted to do and needed to do at that time. They were living, chopping down trees and building their own little places and, as you say, drinking swamp water. And here I am living downtown Toronto in an upscale condo, travel the world. Did they succeed? Of course they succeeded.
If the only way a woman could own land as homesteaders is if she were a widow, a head of a family. She could only be a head of a family if she were a widow, and then she could own land. My mother-in-law, she came with her sister, who was supposed to keep house for her brother. And there were a lot of young eligible men with very few eligible girls. They were very anxious to find wives. My mother-in-law's sister was also caught up in this, the young men's desire for wives, and somebody got her. So my mother-in-law started keeping house for her brother. Then her brother found himself a wife, and there wasn't enough room in the house for my mother-in-law. There wasn't enough money for my mother-in-law to go back to Europe, so she had to, at the age of 17, quickly make up her mind which one of the boys she was going to marry. Sometimes young women were imported as possible wives. And one man said he would marry, and then he took a look at the person that was sent, and he changed his mind. The men, I don't think, acknowledged how significant the contribution of the women were. Without the women, they could not have succeeded at all.
Yeah, see, my mother was born on this farm in Saskatchewan. Every summer of my life for 18 straight years, from the age 1 on, I was there 3 months out of the year. I loved it, every moment of it. See, my father is a businessman, and you know, a businessman is busy all day, and the kids are in the way. But on a farm, a kid is always useful. So there I was with these older men all day long. Quite an experience for me. The 3 men never married. None of the Jewish girls from Winnipeg would want to live on a farm. They'd love to visit and ride on a horse, and then they'd say goodbye and go back to Winnipeg. Now, remember, all those days I was there, everything was by horses. There was no such thing as tractors. You want to cultivate the field, you had a team of 8 horses, and they ran those horses, and they did all the plowing, the cultivating, the harvesting, everything was done that way. You know, each horse had its own name. It had its own name and personality. And I mean, this Nell she's always lagging behind. And Bob, he's the good one. Everyone had their own personality, okay? They finally switched over to a tractor, 1942. That was the saddest day of their lives, I think. This hot, steamy motor raising all its noise, no personality. They really felt it was like a cultural shock to them. Once a year, the boys would go to Regina, that's 135 miles away, for the high holidays. Every year, they'd see his one movie of a year. And I'd come out every year and I'd say, "How was the movie?" And he'd tell me all about it. On this one particular occasion, I said, "Well, Ben, tell me about the movie." He said, "Well, Lawrence," he said, "I got into this movie, and about after 15 minutes, I realized this was the same movie I'd seen the year before." So he didn't enlarge his experience. Early years, they had to learn how to get along with the other settlers there. The other settlers in that area were all terribly anti-Semitic at first. When they came in and formed this settlement, there was a petition to the Saskatchewan government to make them go away because these men would come out here and they'd work on Sunday. There was a story about one of my uncles when he was about 8 or 9 years old. He was coming down a lonely road at night and a hay wagon came by. Now that means 3 miles an hour with horses, and the custom is anybody need a lift, they hop on the hay wagon. So he jumped on and they kicked him off. But as time went on, they were very hardworking. They got to know each other and finally became very good friends. And they were all like brothers and sisters after a while.
My father came with his brothers, and my grandfather and grandmother came a little bit later. My grandfather, he was a rabbi, and so he taught kids Hebrew and to pray and traditional Jewish teachings. Saturday nights they had dances, and actually my family supplied the music. My Aunt Gitel played the fiddle, and my cousins Lionel and Elliot played the guitar and banjo. They would also have teas where they would go to each farmer's house once a week, and the women would bake cakes and cookies, and it was a very nice atmosphere. Of course, the farmers all helped each other whenever they could. There was a drought for many years in Saskatchewan. Things were very tough, and they toughed it out. They had periods where even if they had wheat or barley, they couldn't sell it because there were world surpluses. And they could only sell the wheat or barley when the government allowed them to sell maybe a trainload at a time.
It has been 10 years that I have been working my land, and my 4 sons used up their strength, turning it from a desolate place into cultivated fields. And I still came to a point of crisis, and there is no living here. And our efforts went down the drain. And his family is burdened with work, but this labor is for nothing, worse than all of the peddlers and merchants and traders and artisans in the city.
Is it locked too? Oh shoot. No, it isn't. Oh my. Go out. This is the pantry where my sister Grace used to bake all the thing. Oh my, look at the books. Oh, Time magazines. From what date?
We had the Cottenburgs Hotel. That's what kept us alive.
Yeah, in the summer. From 10 to 52.
Yeah. We had
Yeah.
lots of good people.
Top people.
Good cooking and baking.
My Baba had a very good reputation, and it was,
And
her
we had-
food was delicious.
We had homegrown sweet corn and onion. And
Everything. My mother and her sister came to America because there was no money for a dowry in Russia where they were. After a while, they brought their parents to Canada. My Zayda was a very religious man, and that's what he did. He did nothing, shall we say. Zayda working was not for him, not in the factory. So they borrowed money and they bought the farm in New Glasgow. My Bubba was the home gardener, let's say.
Yes.
She could grow
Anything.
anything, and
Corn,
she
lettuce, tomatoes,
everything, you name it, she had it. Now here's a story here. This is my grandmother had a broken arm. When I was 5 years old, I had a birthday party. I was given, it was supposed to be a lamb. It turned out to be a billy goat. The billy goat, my Bubba thought that she could train him. She trained him so good he broke her arm. You know, in the Bible or wherever it says that they had to rotate 7 years. As recently, I found out our arrangements of the farm turns out to be 7 years. It was, the first year was corn. The next 2 years were oats. 3 years, 3 years of hay makes it 6, and 1 year of grazing or fallow, and then pasture, and then they'd start all over again. We went to New Glasgow School, and that was completely Protestant school board. Yeah, in fact, the first year that I went to school, we used to have a Christmas pageant every year for the Junior Red Cross. And the first year, I played baby Jesus until my Bubba heard about it. And all hell broke loose. We had a man that worked for us 30, 40 years, a Belgian man that came to the country, Pete, and he became part of the family. He was a hired man, but
he lived with us.
You know, there was something, I don't think he ever got paid. I don't know.
He just lived there.
He just lived. When it came in the fall, he'd go into the city for a couple of weeks, he'd get drunk, and he'd come back home.
Come and get me.
And come and get me, yeah. I remember digging him out to Craig Street to the place and taking him home. My cousin Willie, who in later days was the mayor of Saint-Sophie. Imagine this, a Jewish mayor in a district that was like more than 90% French. And he was mayor, I think, for 12 years when he died, and he would still be mayor if he's still alive, because they loved him so much. When there was a job to be done, they'd ask Willie, who should we give it to? Because they knew that he was fair and he would give it to somebody that needed it. The only payment that Willie ever got for giving it, they'd run through his yard maybe in the winter with a snowplow or something like that. He has a road named after him. In the country,
everyone was neighbor.
A neighbor is a neighbor. It's not just somebody living next door. When it came to threshing or cutting things or doing, when all the farmers got together. We were 9 of us, but there was never that I can remember a bad word spoken. I lost my father when I was 5 years old, and I can say truthfully, I had a wonderful childhood. Here's an auntie of mine. That tree I planted on my mother's grave. Okay, Moishe Bailey, Louis Baronoff. Here's my father.
Der Moment sollst die mein Kind nicht sammeln, all der Schmerz.
Never have you ever farmed before. My father was a very rich man, as I said, and he lost everything just by signing for a very good friend of his. And in order to keep the family together, we ended up on a farm. He bought a farm, and he paid $2,000, didn't pay. 10 years to pay out.
We had a big chicken house to hold enough chickens, 400 or 500 chickens, and that was our living then. Yeah. Butter and cream.
Yeah, but mostly the living was from when the people came for the summer. Come on.
That was the summer people.
Yeah, well. You know, ask me how I took a bath. My mother took a big tub. Don't laugh. Filled it with, keep quiet you. Made sure that the boys didn't come in, but seriously, filled it with with water from the stove, and I got into that tub. Honest to God. I don't know how I did it. I had to travel 6 miles to go to school because the only Protestant school was in New Glasgow. The government paid to have someone pick me up. By horse. By horse, yes. Then he would put me into with 2 horses, and it was for 6 children. And he would also wrap a brick that he took out of the oven to put under my feet. Because remember, I was traveling in 40 and 50 below zero. When I first started school, the teacher referred to me as a Jew. And I turned around and I said to her, but my parents are Jewish, I'm Jewish, I can't help it. So that's the way I answered her. We had that. Well, at the very beginning, when we first moved there as a kid, when we used to go into the village to buy feed or whatever, so the first thing they would say when I went with my brother, so I'd hear them say, "Le Juif s'en vient," the Jew is here. But it didn't, wait a minute, it didn't bother us. But there was one day the old priest died from the church, and a young priest came by the house and asked for a donation. So my mother went out and gave whatever she had. I don't know if it was a nickel, a dime, or a quarter. I don't know. I'm just saying, I don't know what she had. And he said, "What's your name?" And she says, "Abramovich." So they announced in church that Abramovich, the Jewish farmer, gave a donation to the church. And since then, I'm telling you, they were all at my wedding, and you couldn't get a nicer bunch of people.
Der Moment sollst die mein Kind nicht sammeln, all der Schmerz, ihr bitter Herz, der Quick hier die nicht schon mehr. The moment that das Brief on the lesen, und sie wird genesen, all der Schmerz, ihr bitter Herz.
The boards that this is mounted on come from the barn of my uncle. The farm tools are all my grandfather's. This would have been his pitchfork. This would have been his cane to herd the cattle with. This is my father and brothers. This is myself, my brother and sister.
Well, I'll tell you what, the Jews after a while got ahead, and when they got there, they were poor, and they looked the residents before looked down on them. A bunch of immigrants, but slowly, slowly they worked their way up, and they were more and more respected. After all these years, certain things stay with you. Going to the synagogue, and all these old people who were there, old men, they were probably in their 40s or late 30s at the time, but to a kid of that age, they were all old people. I remember quite well was Mr. Albert talking to my father one day. Whether they believe in God or not, that's always a question. And Mr. Albert, he was a pretty smart man. I remember saying to my father, you know, Chaim, he said, if there's a God, we're playing it safe, we came to shul, he says. And if there is no God, at least we come once a year, we meet all our people from St. Sophie, otherwise how do we always get together?
St. Sophie, when I was a kid, there were meetings with the elders that used to say, the synagogue is doomed. The families are all moving away from St. Sophie, moving to the city. There won't be enough for a minyan. We're never going to carry it on. And every year we get a pretty full house for the high holidays. Out-of-towners keep coming back to their family roots. It's nice to see friends and family every year. You catch up. There's no whole lot of praying going on because everybody sits and talks.
Wait, you have to wait.
Come here, Aaron.
When we got married, he wanted to be a farmer always when he got older. And I says, why, when you're older, if you want to enjoy yourself now? So we bought a farm. They said I wouldn't succeed, I would never remain, my mother-in-law especially. How could I be a farmer? I never dirtied my hands, I never washed anything at home. We had 6 cows and 2 horses and 4 pigs, and that's all we had. We had about 2 dozen chickens. So I didn't know a thing about farming. So I got the farmers, they like the Reader's Digest, they have the Farmer's Digest. And I cut out articles, and then I studied about farming. At that time, I didn't have inside plumbing with 2 children. I had a wood stove that always went out on me. We didn't have electric, so I didn't have a radio, so I'd sing to them. And I have a terrible voice. Leonard, I have a picture there. He was 6 years old. We're sitting on the first tractor and he was driving it. I'll never forget my mother. If she didn't have a heart attack that day, we said he could do it. Each one of them could do it. My husband could have made a lot of money, but he was doing what he loved, and I loved it. If I feel low, I'll get in the car and I'll drive there.
So you must have eaten some of my spinach, that's for sure. I think everyone in Quebec has eaten my spinach because I'm not, the only supplier to this company here. And when my father passed away, it was a little too much for me to handle. We evolved into liquidating all the poultry and the hogs, and I kept continuing working on the land. With the sod, which I had too much land for sod only, so I decided we're going to do some other crops. At the same time as producing, we do a lot of packaging, we do a lot of processing for other producers. But it's a very, very tough business today to be in. It's mainly marketing. Actually, I'm going to be the last farmer in Quebec, a Jewish farmer anyways. Because, you know, it's just too hard of a life to put onto my children, that's for sure.
I came from a part of Czechoslovakia that was called Sudetenland. My parents were able to walk out. They left everything behind. The reason we were able to get exit visas to Canada was that a representative from the Canadian Pacific came to prove to himself that we were actually farmers. And not only were we farmers, but our farming families go back to the 1800s.
And at that time, the restrictions to get into Canada were that you were going to live either farm for 5 years, work in a mine for 5 years, or do forestry for 5 years. So they came to this farm, all 38 of them living in this house, and there was a cow on this farm, and then no one knew how to milk a cow by hand. So then the decision became, who's going to milk this cow? And they decided that the person in the crowd that was the pianist must have the strong fingers, strong feet. He was the person that ended up milking the cow. You know, the non-Jewish neighbors were very welcoming, very helpful. My uncle, who had our farm before we did, was, as Mother said, very observant with Shabbat. And we had neighbors next door, and still are our neighbors. They were relatively religious, you know, Presbyterians. And so on Shabbos, the neighbor would come over and take our cans of milk, which were 2 or 3 cans, and take them to the end of the lane for the truck to pick them up. And on Sunday, my uncle would go over to the neighbor's farm and do the same for him. Oh, I really like working with the cows and knowing the cows. Like from a very early, like literally from the age of 5, I knew every cow. And up until we got big numbers of cows, like I knew every cow too. To know them and their pedigrees and that kind of stuff. And that was always my first love, was being with the livestock. She's 191 days since the last time we bred her. We can do all those things. When she's milking, if she's down less than 80% of her 10-day average, it'll flash here to highlight this cow. And what you're really trying to monitor here is how quickly and efficiently the people in the parlor are getting the milkers on the cows and the milk flow. Farming as a business is a great way of life. Farming as a way of life is a lousy business. If you run it as a business, it's a fabulous place to grow up and raise families. And if you're just going after the romanticism of going out there and walking your fields and doing what you feel like doing that day, or staring out the back window at the lovely scenery, then you're going to be in trouble.
Hitler was coming, I guess we were going. So we all had to go on a farm. That was the rule at that time, to go on a farm and stay on a farm for 5 years. I was about 3 years old when came to Canada. Then everybody, after 5 years, went into their own field. And some of us stayed in agriculture. I might have had a bar mitzvah. If I had, it was a very small one, just with my father and myself going to a synagogue. When I went to school, where there weren't too many Jews, sometimes I'd have to show it physically that I was a Jew. And when you have cows, you can't really stay home on Shabbos and so on. So my Jewish upbringing wasn't too much. Oh, I had a feeling from the cows since I was born, you might say. Passion, which I still have, and my son does too. But the funny story is, when I graduated from school, my dad thought it would be a good idea if I was a butcher. So he bought me an apron and a knife, and I got a job through him in a butcher packing plant. So I was there. I had to cut cows' heads and do things that I didn't like. So I stayed there. I stayed at that job for about 2 hours, and that was the end of that. My dad was ready to shoot me, you might say. So I went on the road and sold grass seed, farm seeds, and I loved the cattle, and the cattle were where my customers were, and I used to buy and sell livestock. Then I bought a cow that became the mother of a very, very famous bull. She was one of the highest selling bulls in Canada, and he made me enough income that I could buy a farm and start on my own.
And my father's philosophy when he built the place was he was going to build the smallest, most productive, efficient farm and keep it small, and his concentration was on elite cattle. And so we started with 35 cows, and as time went on, as the industry evolved and changed, he added on and made it to 50 cows, and now today we're at 72 cows.
This is a retirement project in between academia and all that. We've kept our finger on the land. We opened as a winery in '99. These red grapes are turning lovely colors, and we usually harvest late October, early November, and that's one of the ways to get at better wine. You increase the sugar content. We're one of the few estate wineries that have won the Grape King Award. This was an award given by the Ministry of Agriculture and Industry for the best kept vineyard. And we do Pinot Noir, we do Cabernet Franc, we do Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Chardonnay, we do ice wine. Basically, we're growing what we want to think of as decent wines in Ontario.
We came from Hungary in 1957, but we went to Montreal, and we moved here in 1960 to farm, and the Jewish colonization was already there. There was a couple, George and Charlotte Wissenberg, and they were amazing people. If you had some little problems, they would help you. And the Baron Hirsch Society gave you a little bit of money. They would loan you between $1,000 and $3,000. And Mrs. Wissenberg, who was a remarkable woman, she had all kinds of things for the kids. So she would gather up the kids for all the holidays, and she'd rent a space before we had one, like for Purim or Hanukkah or something. She would make it fun, and everyone would bring food, and we could get together, and it was wonderful. And eventually we put enough money together to buy a one-room school, which was our shul. And we had someone come to Dublin on high holidays, so we would get together and for all the holidays and birthdays, whatever, we would always use the shul. Everybody would bake and bring things. I mean, they knew everybody, and he would go around and come visit and see how you're doing, you need something. It was very nice. Poultry and fruit, that's pretty much all we do in this area. And nobody dairy farmed here. Well, you know, it was very hard. We were all immigrants, we had no money. And we didn't know we were poor, we just thought we had no money. I mean, we lived well. Kashrut was a problem because there was nothing. So we raised our own chickens, and then Peter's uncle was the rabbi in Port Colborne, would come and shecht it, and we'd have to pluck. When the kids started growing up and they reached pretty much high school, people left. People left because there was no Jewish life here, and they didn't want them to intermarry. No, people just didn't see anything for their kids. It's not that they didn't see a life for their kids, they didn't see a partner for their kids.
When someone said, "What are you doing in the city?" Yeah, it's true. I'd never really been in a city before. They said, "Well, come up to Killaloe." And here it was, you know, it was thigh-deep snow, and it was cold. There were more stars than I'd ever seen in my life. And the stars especially just caught my attention. And At that point, the guy who drove us up said, and by the way, land here is really cheap. And another guy who'd come up with me said, oh, let's buy land together. And then we started the search for land. I mean, we moved here when the government was pushing people off the land, offering to buy the land for next to nothing and plant red pine plantations. And by coming, we actually turned around a government program because we started buying land and giving value to something that had no value. Like that one there looks quite good. There's more green up in the upper part, just below the blossom.
Uh-huh.
And this is a plum.
Ah, what kind of plum?
It's called a cherry plum. It's a hybrid between a cherry and a plum. Certainly in Hebrew school, the idea of kibbutz was a big input, a big influence on me, the idea of sharing land and working together. If you take a model like Morning Glory, we have people sharing the land. And if you can go beyond that to people sharing land and sharing childcare and sharing tools. And so learning how to cooperate and share like in a kibbutz, that's where I see another future, that cooperation and sharing has to come to the fore. And that's where I think, a Jewish mother could say, yes, we have a model of the kibbutz, the mashav, that we can actually share and we can actually grow food. It's in our blood to actually be close to the land enough to appreciate, the God-given gifts that we have. And that keep, the creation is here to be appreciated.
Hi, girls. We'll just give them a little bit of love, get them nice and big so they're hardy enough, and then we can transplant them out into the field. This year we're doing about 15 varieties of ornamental flowers to braid into garlic braids for our annual garlic festival at the Carp Farmers Market. I got more exposure to farming by being part of a CSA program in Montreal, which is the type of farm that we currently run, and it's a vegetable basket program. Food baskets are prepaid. The people who are purchasing the food are like a part of the farm. They're getting a share in the harvest. So they actually support the farm early in the season when the farm needs the money to get seed, finance equipment repairs, all that. And the farmers say, we'll be your farmer for the year, and hopefully for a lifetime. And we have now, people that we've been their farmer for 6 years. When I'm sitting up here on this tractor, I can see my crops. I'm actually driving right over 3 rows of carrots or 3 rows of beets, and I can steer and weed in between every row, but not actually weed my crops. They don't make this tractor anymore. So we've got about 1/8 of an acre or 1/10 of an acre in sweet peas. It's fun to go in here. We just walk along and find the appropriate place. And you just lift this up like this. You can feel the heat coming out of there. So that's what these little peppers and these little tomatoes want. That's my mom. Hello, my Jewish mother. I'm good. They're making a movie about Jewish farmers. That's me. That's me. Yeah, and you. My mom's starting to become a farmer too. I relate a lot of my spirituality to the land. That's, I think, what inspires our farming so much, is that we feel very connected to our land in a spiritual way. Just like David was a shepherd, And he used his strength and dexterity to fend off the bears and lions from his flock, you know, and then that was the same power that he used to fight Goliath. So we take that also and fight corporate agriculture with our, you know, small family farming, bringing culture back into agriculture. See this young garlic color in there? Yeah, it's got like that green smell to a green earthy smell.
Ben a jiddische cowboy, ich passe de cattle en ich hied sie ab a ganz langen Tag. Ich treib sie weg, wisse du Gras zu essen, ich sing und ich jodel, und das ist mein Job. Jodli lady, jodli, jodli lady, jodli. Holy lady, holy lady. Ich steh auf sehr früh in dem Frühmorgen und ich fiete mein Pferdl in Wasser im Moor. Ich tu an dem Sattel vorreiten dich in Jodel, bin ein jiddischer Cowboy, ich jodel also. Yodely lady, oh.